Hello, everyone. I am Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Management and Professional Networks for William & Mary, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, William & Mary APIM Professionals Celebrating and Strengthening Our Community. Today's discussion will be led by William & Mary APIM alumni discussing overcoming career challenges in the face of xenophobia and discrimination and engaging community support in the current environment. This is a partnership between William & Mary's Asian Pacific Islander Middle Eastern Southwest Asian alumni efforts, the Asian Centennial at William & Mary, and William & Mary's professional networks under the William & Mary Alumni Association. I want to acknowledge and say thanks to my colleague Ivana Marshall, Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement and Inclusion Initiatives at William & Mary, for her help in making today's event possible. Ivana serves as the staff liaison to William & Mary's APIM alumni efforts and is also a member of the planning committee for the Asian Centennial at William & Mary. It's my pleasure to invite Ivana to say a few words before we turn things over to our esteemed panel. Ivana.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much, Michael. You all are in for a treat with the dynamic panel we see on our screens right now. As Michael has shared, my name is Ivana Marshall, and I have the distinct pleasure of serving 3 of our identity-based alumni communities. APIM, which stands for Asian, Pacific Islander, Middle Eastern, Southwest Asian, which is probably a pretty interesting nomenclature. And if you're wondering where that came from, we based it on our William & Mary Academic Department, AIMS, the Asian Middle Eastern Studies Department, thinking that we could bring together really diverse cultures, distinct cultures, and work together to build community in the same ways that we've done with our Creme Del Association of LGBTQ+ alums and our Latinx alumni group. And so I am so honored to pass things back over to Michael so that you all can hear from this panel. And actually, before I forget, we have 2 of our APIM leads on this panel, actually. Clarissa Delgado is our co-lead, and Amandeep Sidhu, who we will hear from, is also a part of our Asian Centennial work, our APIM work. And so I definitely want to hear your thoughts and your questions in the chat about getting more involved with the Centennial and the APIM alumni community. Thank you all so much. Michael?
Thank you, Ivana. As you can tell, we are so lucky to have Ivana leading our alumni community efforts in this identity-based communities that she's a part of. And she also is our University Advancement Chair of our DE&I initiatives, which we are thrilled to have her in her new role on that in that capacity. Just a few housekeeping items with technology. As you probably know, this is not your first Zoom, I'm sure, but today's session is being recorded and we will notify all of our registrants once the recording is available on our wmalumni.com website. Questions will be welcome, and our moderator, Clem Chang, will address as many questions that time will allow. If you roll over the bottom portion of the Zoom window, you should see a Q&A icon appear. Please use that feature to submit your questions, and I will monitor the Q&A and address them with Clem when time permits. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce our panel and moderator. We provided via email and our registration pages a complete bio for each of our speakers. So for the interest of time, I would just quickly share a few brief backgrounds for each of our panelists, and I'm sure their experiences and expertise will be incorporated into their remarks throughout the hour. First, we have Clarissa Delgado, who Ivana just mentioned, William & Mary class of 2009, and currently the CEO and co-founder of Teach for the Philippines based in Manila. So good evening and good morning soon, I guess, for you, Clarissa. Thank you so much for joining us. Next, we have Bayan Murphy, William & Mary class of 2010 and general partner at Indicator Ventures out of Boston and Miami. So she's joining us, I believe, from Boston today. And so thank you, Bayan. Next is Amin Sidhu, William & Mary class of 2000 and a litigation partner at Winston & Strawn's DC office. And thank you, Amin, for joining us. This terrific panel will be moderated by William & Mary alumnus and current Senior Vice President of Human Resources at Comcast, based out of Philadelphia, Clem Chang. Clem is a graduate of the class of 1986 and proud parent of a William & Mary alumna of the class of 2019. I had the pleasure of working with Clem on my last in-person event back in February of 2020, when he and his William & Mary alumni colleagues hosted a terrific William & Mary Community Breakfast and Business Cards at Comcast's headquarters in Philadelphia as part of our William & Mary Professionals Week. We are delighted to have him join us again today and help lead this important conversation for our community. Clem, please take it away, and thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you so much, Michael. It is great to see you again and work with you again. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with all our participants today and with some terrific alums here on the panel. So let's just get right into this. Michael referenced this. There's some great diversity of experience as well as diversity of geography. We even have Clarissa from across the globe. So I'm interested from the backgrounds that you bring, where you sit, what your experiences are, like what would you like to share in terms of your viewpoints on the anti-Asian sentiment that's gone on for a while, but it's kind of built over the last year, at least here in the United States. Bain, could we start with you?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. So as Michael mentioned, that I'm in both the tech and the venture capital world. And yeah, just to give you some kind of facts around, what the demographics look like, it is definitely not the most diverse industry. And I've been in this industry for 9 going on 10 years. There are, very few VCs just in general. There are fewer of them than professional athletes. And there are even fewer women and then people of color. So when you cut all those intersections together, APIM women who are in VC, there's very, very few of us. And so there's a lot to kind of unpack there. Happy to talk about that more. My viewpoint on what's been going on is very generally, like, America is unique in that we are a country of immigrants. I think there are very, very few of us that can claim that we are native to this country. And so we've always been forced to, live alongside and work alongside people who look very different from us, come from very different experiences and backgrounds. And I think that this poison of racism has just always been around. And I think when stressors happen, either on the macro level, wars or diseases, or more on an intimate level where you might have had an experience the previous evening or, the same day, these stressors kind of overflows, right? And, I think that's what we've seen in the past year, and it doesn't help when you have leadership that kind of exasperate that. And right now it's something that I think is in the forefront, but I think the underlying sentiment is not a new thing. And so of course, that brings a lot of anxiety, but it also brings an opportunity for change. So I guess that's kind of how I would kick off.
Yeah, thank you, Bain. It's easy to forget that we are a country of immigrants. So I'll move over to Amin. What would you like to share?
Sure, thanks so much, Clem. So my background, I was born and raised in Virginia, born in Norfolk, grew up in Richmond, which has its own history with the Confederacy and the South. My parents were the first Sikh family to settle in the Richmond area. So my upbringing was really kind of centered around education and outreach and explaining to our neighbors and classmates why I wore a turban and why I had this unique identity, why my father had that identity, why my younger brothers and people in our community had that identity. And so, for me, as I navigated high school and then on to William & Mary and on to law school and a clerkship and into the legal profession, at almost every turn, I was the first turban wearing Sikh to work at my consulting firm after college, to be a clerk on the Court of Appeals of Virginia, to be one of a handful of turban wearing Sikhs in the big law world, where, as Bain, spoke to the level of diversity in VCs, which I think is less than the legal profession. We still have a lot of work to do across the entire spectrum of minority communities. And so when I made partner in 2013, I was the first turban wearing Sikh a partner at an AmLaw 100 firm in US history, which tells you a little bit about the spectrum of mentors and guideposts I had within my own community. It was very limited. I could count on one hand the number of lawyers that I knew kind of growing up and coming into my college and sort of formative years of figuring out what I wanted to do with my life. And so, my perspective has always been one of outreach and education and changing hearts and minds. 9/11 happened, and that was a flashpoint for the entire AAPI community, and in particular the South Asian community, and more acutely the Sikh community. And that was a wake-up call to say, as much as I thought we had made progress, there was so much hate, there was so much misunderstanding, there was so much distrust that all brewed to the surface. And it took the form of violent hate crimes and employment discrimination and profiling. And sadly, what we've seen in the last year and a half with COVID-19, and in particular, the last couple of years of the prior administration, just a bubbling up of the acceptance of hate and the acceptance of bias and the normalization of that kind of treatment of minority communities. And COVID-19 and the association with East Asia really gave just one more excuse and one more reason for folks that are inclined to do bad things to go ahead and do those bad things. And so I do think this has been yet another flashpoint for the AAPI community. I think it comes on the heels of significant both sadness and trauma, but also change that's come out of the Black Lives Matter movement in the summer of 2020. And so, I think we are at one of the next inflection point. 20 years after 9/11, we're sitting here having similar conversations about similar challenges, but I take the viewpoint that I'd like things to change in my lifetime. And so I'm hopeful that this is yet another moment of progress and positive coming out of the negative.
Thank you, Amin. Clarissa, so over to you.
Sure. So I think what Bayan and Aman have shared are deeply personal and also so reflective of the situation in the States. I guess I come from a background where I never grew up in the United States, and I've been watching this and experience all of this really from the outside, really, and just looking at the rest of the world from exactly the region that prior to COVID has all been so mysterious to so many because of our diversity. We can be overwhelming. We speak so many languages, so many religions. We look in so many different ways. And I guess my outside perspective has always been that white people have always been the minority for the whole world. And so the rest of the world has diversity every day for breakfast because we have to. And I've always been intrigued at I guess, let's say, the privilege to contemplate this diversity, right? From a place wherein you can keep people out, whereas the rest of us, we live with it. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And I'm sure you hear the conflicts day in and day out. I think I'll just keep it succinct and say, given all of the anxiety and unknowns of COVID, when I saw and heard of the horrific things happening abroad, the stem of so much hatred is not knowing, right? And being afraid. And there was so much to be afraid about in 2020, so much. Worse, there was very little room for dialogue because we were all locked up in our homes. And so many of us around the world still are. And so I think the rise was a way for people to channel perhaps their anger, whether, incorrectly perhaps, but I guess from an educator's perspective, from where I always stand and trying to understand why it could be happening, I think people just didn't know where to channel what they were afraid of, and channeling it towards an entire region of 3 billion people just sounds, a little easier to do than really think about what's happening. outside your door or in the air around you, right? And so, yeah, I guess that's from the outsider's perspective looking in at the anti-Asian sentiment that raised up, not just in the States, but all over the world, really.
Thank you, Clarissa. Some great perspectives. So nice way to start things off. I mean, you mentioned, and it's clear, obviously, you wear a turban as part of your faith. It's very visible and obvious, and I have to imagine that elicits curiosity, questions, bias, maybe discrimination. Could you just go a little bit deeper with us, and if you don't mind sharing some, some perspective or experience around wearing a turban?
Yeah, absolutely, Clem. Happy to. So I'm a member of the Sikh faith. It's a religion that's a little over 500 years old, originates from what is now India, the South Asian, sort of Pakistan, India subcontinent. And the idea of wearing a turban, of having this visible identity, really came out of a reaction to what was happening in South Asia at the time. You had a pervasive caste system. You had inequality between men and women, and Sikhism arose as a faith that sort of had this alternative path. There's absolute equality between men and women, between socioeconomic class, and it's really centered around the idea of defending justice, freedom of religion, equality. And the turban was worn culturally as a denotion of high class, of royalty. And so in the Sikh faith, the idea was, nope, everyone will wear a turban, everyone will wear this crown. Sikh men wear the turban, it's optional for Sikh women. But underneath the turban, my hair is uncut. So the idea in the Sikh faith is that your hair is a part of your body. It's something that shouldn't be destroyed. It's a symbol of saintliness. And so my hair is longer, it's tied in a bun. My beard is actually much longer, and it is tied and tucked and sprayed and gelled. And so I get ready in the morning and take at least twice as long as my wife, which is a source of lots of frustration. And so that's the idea of the turban. The other symbols are also sort of symbolic of different concepts in the faith. Steel bracelet worn on your dominant hand as a reminder of your responsibilities to the faith. That it's used to be part of your battle armor, where you wear multiple bracelets to protect yourself from a sword's blow. And in Sikhism, we were defending not only our own faith, but other minority faiths from the dominance of the time. A small comb that keeps a reminder that you keep yourself in neat appearance and always take care of the way that you look in public. A small sword, which is symbolic of defending those principles, defending justice, defending equality. And then a special boxer short that was sort of worn out of necessity, but also a reminder that you do not have to be an ascetic living in the woods alone to be spiritual, to be an active member of the faith. You should be an active part of your community. You should have a family. You should be engaged. And so that's the uniform of Sikhs. And so by adopting this uniform, it is very visible, right? And we talk about in the sort of diversity, equity, and inclusion space, the idea of covering or masking as people of color in the professional setting, that we sometimes try to hide our identity and blend in. That has not been an option for me because I have such a visible article of faith that I wear. And so I mentioned briefly in my intro, at almost every turn, I've been sort of the first, right? So it's been an opportunity to either kind of crouch down and remain quiet, or be vocal and use it as an opportunity to educate. And so as I've navigated my professional career, I've tried to do that in a lot of different ways. Some of it's sort of just, the casual conversations where someone asks a question and I don't shy away from having that conversation. There have been times when there have been slightly more confrontational questions, not offensive, but still, not just the curiosity, but a little bit more of a questioning of why you might maintain such a visible identity and not assimilate in the United States. So for me, born and raised here, I'm an American, right? And I'm a Sikh American in that I have this unique identity. But what I've tried to do is again, kind of take the opportunities I have professionally to raise the profile of the Sikh community more generally, right? So it's just an opportunity to engage and talk about the work that I do, the pro bono work that I do in the Sikh community. And that in and of itself becomes an education opportunity to say, okay, we're working on this case, and it happens to be focused on religious discrimination involving the Sikh community. I'm going to take this as an opportunity to educate my peers. So it's almost like by osmosis, they're going to understand why they happen to have someone that wears a turban working with them and what that means. So sometimes you can do it in more subtle ways.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Really a lot there. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit. We've all seen more in the public awareness, at least here in the United States, around anti-Asians, but in fact, they've been taking place for a really long time, all the way back, to the Chinese Exclusion Act was way back in 1882. We've had Japanese internment camps. Vincent Chin was, murdered, bludgeoned in 1982. And you mentioned the post 9/11 profiling, that's gone on. So this has been going on for a long time. When you think a little bit about the history of, some of this sentiment and where we are today, like what comes to mind? Bayan, back over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I, kind of touched on this earlier, is that I think it's always sort of been there. And there are people in our country who are more exposed to other cultures than others. And when there are stressors that happen, whether it's a war or, disease or whatever it is, and, there's leadership that kind of encourages that or makes that more normalized, then you see more violence, or you think people think it's okay to express that or feel that way. And I think we're currently going through that. And I think that, given where China in particular, and that's my heritage, there's going to be shifts in where China is in the world and its place in the world. And particularly in my industry, technology, a lot of it is connected to that as well. That's going to continue being a conversation. People are going to feel more threatened. And so I think it's incredibly important for us to make change and educate and talk about this, because I don't think, I think we went through a year of COVID and we're very successfully coming out of that in the States. I don't think that this sort of sentiment is going to end with us coming out of COVID, because I think there are other things at play. So I think there's still a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Thank you for that, Bayan. Clarissa, do either of you have anything to add to that before we move on? Right, so
very briefly. I said this earlier, and I really do think it is the case. I think we're at this, pivot inflection point where I think there's an awakening in the broader AAPI community that we haven't seen since Vincent Chen's murder. And there was a tremendous amount of work that happened then, again, after 9/11. And I think we're seeing the benefits of what's happened over the last 20 years, that there are, organizations and infrastructure and resources in place where when these bad things are happening, the Asian American Justice Center has reacted quickly and responded with engagement locally to support hate crimes investigations with law enforcement, helping to provide legal resources to the victims, and then proactively working with organizations that are engaging with not just the affected communities, but allies. Right. So Holler Back is an organization that very immediately pushed out bystander intervention training right after the Atlanta mass shootings. And I just think that, you know, we're so much better prepared to respond. But at the end of the day, like, this shouldn't be happening, right? So at some level, whether it's our elected leaders, whether it's business leaders, the need to speak out and speak out vocally is so important. And thankfully, that is happening with the current administration, and sadly did not happen with the prior administration. And so I think, again, we're at this formative moment where I do think a lot of positive can come out of what is so scary and negative.
Well, thank you for sharing some of the reasons to be for the optimism. And let's kind of move along onto the professional side of things. So everyone's familiar with the term glass ceiling, which I think was coined to capture, you know, the challenge that female leaders have in terms of really breaking into the highest echelons of corporate America. The you know, I think the APIM term is around the bamboo ceiling, this same concept. You know, all of you are clearly very successful. Are there certain things that you attribute your success to in terms that you would like to share with the participants, whether it's being, you know, uniqueness about being an APIM professional or not? Clarissa, how about we start with you, if that's okay?
Sure. So I guess I'm very lucky in the sense that I come from a family of very strong women. Both my grandmothers are still alive. They're over 100 years old. Both of them survived the war. My mom's mom was a guerrilla fighter. She was a guerrilla medic during World War II. And I think when you grow up in a dinner table of really strong women, the emphasis was always about who we were rather than what we are. And I guess said differently, they don't mind strong characters, but the emphasis is not on strong, it's on having character. And so I think number one is recognition that I came from a very, and I can speak more about this later, but the Philippines is a very matriarchal society. So I came from a very nourishing, women are totally a-okay to lead over here. But I think more specifically professionally, beyond recognizing that I grew up never doubting what you could be capable of in a country where you've had 2 female presidents and there's even split in Congress and in Senate with women and men. I think mentorship and sponsorship, I can't stress it enough. I feel like every step of my life, I've sought other women mentors and they've simply just been there to guide me. I wish I had found it sooner. I came to this late. I was already in my mid-20s when I kind of came across this, and I wish I had started even as early as high school, to know, I guess, to have the grace to know when to seek, when I need help, and to seek it out, and then also to understand that there's actually so many people willing to help and to guide. And I swear it's made all the difference in my professional career, but most importantly, as I mentioned, to my family and in my life. It's changed my life for the better. It's made me a better person. I feel accountable to I call it my personal board of directors. And I have different women taking different chairs, and I feel accountable to them for being a better person every day. And I would be a completely different person if I didn't have that, and my career would not be anywhere close to where it is. I'd probably still be, contrary to what they say, some people who wander really are lost. I probably would be just completely still lost all these years after college without that guidance.
Well, I hope our audience takes note of the concept of a personal board of directors. So thank you for sharing that. Either Bayan or Aman, do any of you have anything you would like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll go next. Yeah, Clarissa and I have the unique difficulty of having like a glass bamboo ceiling. And it's like interesting that it's called bamboo, because I know bamboo is also one of like, it's like incredibly tough to break. It's like very strong. And so I guess it's a really good label on this. I don't think that I have anything like that I've done uniquely, but I have the benefit of being in a career where it's very obvious from the beginning that just putting your head down and being the hardest worker in the room is not enough. Like that will not, in my world, that will not allow you to progress very far. You need all the other things. And one big thing that you need, which I think is true in many, many careers and industries, but it's very obvious in mine, is a lot of your success and career progression and getting what you want is dependent on your ability to connect with others, right? So broadly, like that's called, networking or having a strong social circle or whatever it is. And so how do you connect with other people when they all look different from you? They mostly have different experiences than you. There's a lot of implicit bias in what you do. It's really, really tough. And so part of my training in my career has been learning how to navigate through those things. And so I would absolutely echo what Clarissa said about, reaching out to communities or people who look and feel like you. I also have a personal board of advisors. I was, one of my mentors years and years ago advised that I build something like that. So I have a close-knit group of women here in Boston who are all amazing leaders in their respective industries. And we get together once a quarter and we, share deal flow. We share intel about, who are bad actors in our industries and who to avoid and things like that. And we're there to support each other. So that's been incredible. And then there are other more like public communities that are either very, Asian focused or women focused to lean on. But I think it's really important, even within your organization or your network, to find allies and really lean on them and connect with them. And kind of avoid people who are sexist or racist or who you just don't have similar values to, but really leaning and trying to find those people, even if they're, in my case, I've also been the first female and Asian investor in almost every single firm I've worked at, right? And so many of my mentors are white men, but they are allies and they're great and they've really taken me far. And then I've also really tried to use my uniqueness, both from a race and gender perspective, as a differentiator for me. And I've really leaned into that. I try to view it as a positive thing. I know that when I walk into a room and into a board of directors and I'm the only Asian female or female, that they're going to remember me. Right? My name looks a little bit different. They're going to remember me and I'm going to lean into that. I'm going to use that as an advantage versus as, something that I should be shying away from. So I would also encourage people to think about doing that.
Really like that, Bayan. I want to ask you one follow-up question. So, given that the VC industry is so male dominated and I take it white male dominated even, you found allies. Like, is there anything that comes to mind for you around your ability to make those connections, build those relationships that you could share?
Sure. I mean, I think, in every, with every human experience, like we're a lot more than how we look. And so when you dig a level deeper, when, you're done listening to men talk about the football game that you never watched or, whatever. And I'm typically the youngest person at firms, right? So they talk about their kids and I don't have kids. There's a lot more commonality and really, really trying to build a relationship with someone who's open to it and trying to find those commonalities and leaning into those, I think is really useful. And of course, you have to show up with a foundational level of competency in your work. Right? So you kind of have to have that, but you need to know that that is not going to get you to that next step, especially in a lot of business industries. You need to take the time to learn about people's backgrounds and experiences and families and connect with them on that level. And it sometimes it takes years of work to find that connection. And you have to be very proactive about it. And I think a lot of people don't bother to do those things. And so they're judging, each other based on very, I think, superficial qualities.
Yeah, thank you for going a little deeper there. Amin, is there anything you would like to share around, just something that's propelled your success?
Sure, happy to, Clem. And I'll just build on where Bayan left off. I think the idea of leaning into my identity and using it as an advantage rather than an obstacle has been sort of my modus operandi for most of my career. It's going to be hard for me to walk into a room and not be visible and remembered as at least the guy in the turban, if not something more substantive. And so I think that having the skills and doing the hard work and putting in the hours, that's table stakes and the bare minimum. And as I was coming up in the sort of big law associate trajectory, at some point along the way, I said, I really want to make partner. Like, what do I need to do? And I had built a universe of the personal board of directors / early mentors, not really knowing the important role that they would eventually play, but they were not, API. They were certainly not in the Sikh or South Asian community. It was a white man and an African American man who were my closest mentors and sponsors, and everything that I sort of built in my career was under their wings. And so as I came into my own, it was knowing that I'd had that resource, and really took that as a reminder of the need to give back and to be a mentor and a sponsor to those coming up behind me. And so that's been a big part of what I've been able to do. I said, when I was coming into the legal profession, I could count on one or two hands the number of Sikhs that I knew who were in kind of the big law universe. And I'm really excited that it's in the dozens and dozens and maybe even hundreds now that they're out there. And that's happened in the last 15 years. And so I just think that taking advantage of those people who are wanting to help you and help you get ahead, that's critical. Because if you don't have those sponsors in your organization, just doing the hard work is not going to be enough. It is going to be political, and there is going to be a need to lean on those folks to speak up on your behalf.
Yeah. So what's clear from just hearing from all three of you is that there's clearly a level of competence that you all have. But with that, it's not enough, and it's the relationship skills and the intentionality around building those connections that really strikes me. So thank you all for sharing that. I'm going to flip it to the other side of the coin here. So you talked about some of the things that have propelled your success. Everybody deals with challenges. It's never kind of a straight line up. If you could think of an example that you'd like to share of a challenge or a struggle, what would come to mind there? Would anybody like to start?
I can start if that's helpful, Clem. I work in social justice and equity, and I think the key is, I find your question so amusing only because I think my key understanding has been that the work is the struggle, at least in my context, and the deep reflection that there's really no endpoint in present history or future history where we can check off that inequity is now solved for all of humanity or all ethnicities have received justice. So in short, the struggle is the work. And I can name two. One, which is the big picture issue that even though it sounds all nice and shiny, achieving improved learning outcomes in a developing nation is a really thorny and complicated challenge. And so while we have started it, when we work only in public education and work with rural and urban communities and have, statistically significant positive impact on the learning outcomes of the kids we teach, I still think about the question of diversity and struggle in terms of my questions about our indigenous youth. I come from an archipelago of 7,600 islands. We speak over 150 languages. Tribal is our history. We were put together as a country by the Spaniards and then perpetuated by the Americans. But before that, we were independent island states. And so our Indigenous youth, our differently abled youth, our out of school youth, these are all communities that deserve the same dignity that any lowland Filipino. I mean, differently, I guess, from Aman and Bayin, I'm part of the majority. I'm brown to all of you, but in my country, everybody's brown. So, so I'm part of the majority over here. And then finally, I think on a more, let's say, operational basis and a struggle, which I think maybe you as the senior VP of HR in Comcast can appreciate, team culture. So I'm the CEO and I'm kind of in charge of making sure to lead the way in that regard. And I think that is a never ending struggle. That really the work is the struggle. And it's never a thing I'll be able to check off that our culture is perfect and we're good to go. And so I work at that patiently impatient, I guess, every day. And it maybe it's not the challenge or the struggle that folks want to hear, but for me, that we have plenty of those, plenty of getting, operational issues left and right, no doubt. But I think the most significant ones, the ones that I spend the most time thinking about, the most adaptive ones are those. Everything else, whether it's government contracts or making presentations to the Senate or whatnot, those are for me technical challenges that as Bayan mentioned, with a certain level of competence you can address. And these other ones, it takes a lot more than competence and a lot more humanity to figure out, and therein lies the rub. So
thank you. Thank you. So Amin or Bayan, is there anything that comes to mind for you in terms of a challenge or struggle that you overcame that you want to share?
I can give an example of I think throughout my career, there are all sorts of different struggles that are related to, culture and gender and, have overcome some of them haven't. I guess I'll just give like a current example so it's not completely like closed off yet. But, currently with my own venture fund, the way the business works is that you raise money from people or institutions and then you invest their money into startups on their behalf. And so, and you do that fund by fund. So once you're finished investing this pool of capital, you have to, fundraise again to do it. And so we don't have if we don't raise a fund, we don't have a job. And it's something that we have to do on a cycle, every 3 or 4 years. And, I think a lot of the wealth in America, so investors that were, investing on behalf of, still is predominantly white male, concentrated in certain areas of the country. That's just the current reality. And hopefully, as a more diverse pool of people generate wealth in this country, then hopefully the LP base, the investor base, will be more and more diverse. But currently, it's very, it's wealth is concentrated to a certain kind of demographic of people. And, when you start off in venture capital as an associate or an analyst, you're primarily responsible for sourcing deals, doing deals. And then as you move up in the ranks, you are more responsible for the other parts of being a VC, including, running a fund and raising capital. And so I think I've really started doing a lot of that fundraising type work in the last maybe 4 or 5 years. And it's really interesting because, when someone is being asked to hand over, millions and millions of dollars and trust you to be the manager of that money, it's a lot more than just, hey, what has your performance or track record been? It's a lot of trust. And a lot of trust also comes from having commonality and having common connections. And, a lot of times it's people who feel and look like you. And I don't feel and look like a lot of the investors that we are, trying to raise money from. And so a lot of that is kind of all bundled in one. I can't say it's because I'm Chinese. I can't say it's because I'm a woman. I can't say it's because I didn't grow up in Massachusetts, where a lot of our investors are. I think it's all sort of bundled up in that. And I can't say it's because I didn't go to the same university as a lot of them. And so right now there is a struggle to figure out, I've successfully now figured out ways to connect with my peers and my previous bosses when I had bosses. Now it's about how do I connect on a deep level with people who require a lot of trust to be able to give you money. So it's been a really interesting situation, and it's something that is really worthwhile me figuring out because I'm going to have to continue doing it for the rest of my career.
That sounds like a challenge.
Yeah.
Is there anything for you that comes to mind, Amin?
Yeah, I mean, I'll try to be brief because this sort of takes me back in time to 16, 17 years ago at the front end of my career. So I was in DC right after I graduated from William & Mary in 2000. 9/11 was the next year. And the organization I've alluded to, the SIG Coalition, didn't exist. And so I was part of a core group in Washington, in New York, in the Bay Area, in California, of Sikhs who were born here or raised here. We kind of understood the system, a handful of lawyers, handful of law students, people that were heading in that direction, people in business, people in media. And we all just came together and said, we need to create an ACLU / ADL / NAACP style organization that doesn't exist to respond. And so that was part of my sort of origin of going to law school, was that I loved that I was doing that work and being so helpful to the community in whatever capacity, and certainly as a lawyer would be able to do even more. And as I was graduating from law school, I really struggled with the idea of, do I go down this path of corporate big law and maybe, lose that passion and opportunity? Or do I jump right into the civil rights nonprofit world and maybe not have the opportunities to grow and break the glass ceiling, bamboo ceiling, whatever is out there in the legal profession? And I really struggled with how I reconciled like my professional desires to like become the best lawyer I could be and really, trailblaze in the corporate world, while not losing this opportunity to really help my community. And I somehow, like by happenstance, figured it out, right? So I brought the SIG Coalition on as a pro bono client at my last law firm, did a tremendous amount of work over the course of the 13 years that I was there. I think in the end, it was, close to $4 million of pro bono work over that period of time. Invaluable resource to the SIG Coalition, legal teams where I was able to add, 7, 8, 10 people at any given year to the various cases that were happening. And now that I moved to Winston, I brought all of that over to Winston and Strawn, and that work is continuing. And we're involved in cutting edge litigation and advocacy to end religious discrimination in the U.S. military, and have made great strides over the last 10 years in that front. We're involved in some of the advocacy around the Indianapolis mass shooting. And so, again, I remember someone early on in my career saying, you have to have a balance, right? You have to figure out like, what's that other thing, whether it's teaching, whether it's community service, whether it's pro bono, whether it's art, whether it's music. There has to be something else that you're passionate about. And, it's great if you love your job day in and day out that pays the bills. And I do truly love what I do. But the fact that I've been able to figure out that balance has been the most rewarding thing. And so I think, whether you're at the front end or somewhere mid-stage in your career, thinking about how you use your identity and your passions to integrate into your day-to-day life. We're just at this point where corporate America is very aware of the importance of social justice and community and engagement. And so there's so much intersectionality right now, an opportunity to be able to do that you shouldn't feel like you're choosing a path that isolates you from something you might be passionate about.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's exactly right. Let's all go out and take advantage of, this moment that we have. So I want to do a time check with Michael and Ivana to see if there are any questions that are coming in from our audience.
Thanks, Clem, and what an incredible conversation. We've been fortunate to hear from all of you, your perspectives, and I think there's so much more that can be discussed, and we look forward to more programs with your engagement and your leadership in this area. One question that has come through that I think kind of carries over a little bit about what you were just talking about. I mean, is a little bit of like how, as not of a diverse community, not a part of a diverse community, how can you be more of a leader and make a difference in sort of driving it in your workplace or in your communities if there's not a lot of diverse individuals in your region, so to speak, and be more leading some of the conversations like we're having today, and figure out a way either through technology or other means to really be creative and driving more perspectives to the table.
Well, Michael, if it's okay for me to step out of the moderator mode for a minute, I'll take a swag at that one. Great question. When I think of inclusiveness, it truly is with a big I, a big tent. And, you know, I know my experiences in the professional world, we really encourage in our employee resource groups, or, you know, our affinity groups, whatever you call them, you don't have to be it to be in is sort of our thing. Like, it always amazes me in the Comcast Asian Pacific American group, just encourage people who are interested in being advocates, allies. They have a curiosity or an interest in supporting, you know, that particular segment. And it could be when you hear the stories, you learn about somebody that is a white male and they happen to be passionate because they are, they, you know, had some friend or a relative, or maybe they adopted, you know, a child that you can't tell by looking at them. So I think the theme that came up today around allyship and really helping bring others along, taking an interest in somebody's career, or, you know, being an advocate in the community for whatever you're interested in, those are all the things that anybody can do to support any, you know, any area that someone's passionate about.
Yeah, and I'll sort of add to that. You know, I think there are, you know, there are certain people who are in, that have titles or in positions in their lives and their careers to do big things, right? Like change a company policy or start an organization or whatever. But I think most of us are not in that position, and there are all sorts of things you can do in your daily life to support and move things forward. And so just a couple that come to mind is, you know, if you are, you know, let's say you're an associate or an analyst at a big firm and you happen to be in charge of campus recruiting that year, or intern recruiting for the summer. That is an opportunity and a chance for you to think about, you know, where there may be gaps in the recruiting process that makes it so that, you know, your process is not inclusive or, you know, equitable. If you are in charge of putting together an event or a panel like this, right? Even if it's a really small part of your company or in your industry, you know, pay attention and think about, is my panel, you know, does it include people of different backgrounds and color? Does it include women? If not, let me add somebody that's, you know, that looks a little different than everybody else. And so I think there are little things that make a really big impact and really move things forward that you can be doing every day, even if you're not a CEO or a founder or a big kind of community leader that you can do.
Great. Any other thoughts before the next question, or are we? Great. Well, thank you for addressing that, Clem and Bay. So I know Ivana has a couple questions that I thought would be really great to have her perspective and involvement in this. So I'm going to actually go on mute and let her chime back in with some questions for you all from our perspective of William & Mary leadership here in the APIM community.
Thank you all so much. What a riveting conversation. So keeping with this theme of allyship and community support, Theresa, this question is for you, but I welcome everyone to chime in. Earlier, you shared that diversity in the US and diversity abroad are two completely different concepts, which they absolutely are. So my question for you comes from a US standpoint. What can US communities, APIM and non, do to support APIM communities abroad?
Thanks, Ivana. That's like the Miss Universe question over here. It's huge. I think simply, so Clem and I were talking before this panel about model minorities, right? And all these other ways that even within our own APIM community, we other ourselves. So it's not just people that don't look like us, but even within the people that do look like us, we tend to sometimes still do some othering. And I shared with Clem, I said, it's a typical divide and conquer strategy, right? If we are busy trying to establish how different the Pacifica people are from the rest of the, Asia, and all these other things, then we lose sight of the fact that we are actually the global majority. It's my private joke with you, Ivana, when you convene our APIM thing and it's, Asia, Pacific Island, Middle East, I said, that's the Eastern Hemisphere. That's half the globe. You just looped them together. And so I think number one is recognizing that America exists as part of the world, and that there is a significantly larger context at play. And that, it's the same way I look at my Filipino diaspora. We spoke earlier about the rise of anti-Asianism. Filipinos serve in the hospitals that are protecting Americans right now. Filipinos serve in the hospitals that are protecting Europeans right now. They are my brothers and sisters, as they are yours. And so I think if we just remind ourselves that we're all on this little planet together, with nowhere else to go, and we put that in front of us every day, it may perhaps broaden our perspective about what are the things that actually really do matter. Does that help, Ivana? I welcome the other panelists to jump in.
I was going to say, I think you won the crown with your response, so no need for us to chime in with anything else.
Well, I know we are wrapping up the hour. I don't know if there's any final question, Clem, that you have, or Ivana, if you have another question. I think that was a terrific question, because this is a world, this is a global issue, and we are one amazing world if we really think about our cultures and our communities. And we are so fortunate to have alumni leaders like you all be a part of this conversation and help drive us as a community forward in this. And I hope that we continue this. This is 1 hour of many hours we need to discuss and support each other. I think the question raised today by one of our attendees is so poignant. William Mary, one of the oldest schools in this country of education and instilling the leadership of future leaders in our community, is leading this. And we are so lucky to keep this conversation going and making a difference in our respective communities around the world, literally through your all leadership. So thank you on behalf of Ivana, myself, and all of us attending today, and what you're doing in your respective communities. I will just say that we have more things coming up. Ivana, anything I know there's stuff in the Asian Centennial coming up in the fall. We're probably taking a few months off for the summer because the curriculum concluded for the academic year this past month, but please stay in touch. Clarissa and Amin are leaders in this community through the APIM alumni. Get involved, reach out to them if you want to learn more about what Ivana and they are doing. And certainly we do have events coming up for alumni this month that might interest you. We have on June 22nd, actually next week, we have a coaching hour for alumni. So if you're looking for career advice and need some advice or want to offer advice, it's a way to network virtually through that opportunity. So certainly we love your participation in that. And then June 30th, we actually have a neat Leaders in Health discussion featuring the Chief Scientist Officer of Moderna as an alumna, the President of the American Academy of Pediatrics is an alumna, and one of the head of global research parts of Pfizer's regulatory pieces of the vaccine efforts is also an alumna. So that panel will be moderated by our Chief Medical Director of William Mary's Student Health Wellness Center. So we're really excited about that event to conclude the fiscal year of our William Mary calendar. So we hope you'll join us again. Please stay involved with Ivana's efforts with the APIM alumni and the celebration this year of our Asian Centennial celebration at William Mary. Clem, thank you so much for leading our conversation and moderating this and all that you've done for William & Mary over the years. We are really fortunate to have you and in our community and as a proud parent as well. And Bea and Clarissa, Amin, keep doing amazing things around the world. Really appreciate your involvement as well with this hour in preparation and giving the time today for all of us. Any last minute things, Ivana, did I miss anything? We're good. Okay. Well, thank you all. Have a great afternoon. Stay well, or evening or morning, whatever time you're joining us, and keep building a stronger, better community for our William & Mary and beyond.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Go Tribe.
Thank you, everyone.
Go Tribe.
Go Tribe.